Hi, my name's Finn Mackesy, and I'm here to introduce you to some of the concepts that we use in Auckland Permaculture Workshop. So I'm going to be using a permaculture lens to share about this empowering communities. And what I'm hoping to do is share with you some kind of key concepts that I think are really important to think about when we're talking about working with and developing, I guess, both resilience but also empowerment within communities, and then also some examples about that. So again, Auckland Permaculture Workshop is, as the name suggests, an Auckland-based organization, and we are focused really on community resilience. And so one of the ways in which we do that is through education. And we run a permaculture design certificate, which is a year-long, we do it delivered over a year. And it's really just to support individuals and kind of active citizens to develop skills and build on their knowledge and understanding. So here's the 5 concepts that I'm really going to be kind of looking at today that I think are really important from an empowerment lens. So I'm going to use the word auditing, kind of flash, probably better ways of saying it, but essentially it's having a community, and you can do this at the scale of a household or, as wide as, the Auckland region if you wanted to zoom out that far. But what we're really looking at is how does a community look at itself and understand itself? Communicating, and this is everything from the way in which we communicate with each other to the way we make decisions, how we resolve conflict, what are the kind of conversations we're having, and I think those really matter. Also this concept of ako, or learning together, and so ako from a Māori worldview is there's not a word for teaching or a separate word for learning, it's all one and the same process. And so it gives rise to opportunities like tuakana tēnā kind of relationships where we have people who are more experienced and those kind of juniors who are learning as novices, and brings in the transition towns or transition culture concept of learning from the elders as well. So I guess it's about this idea of reciprocity and learning or acknowledging that we all have skills. How do we learn together? This idea of sharing, which again is related but distinct, and it's probably obvious, but how do we share resources? How do we share mahi? How do we work together? And lastly, celebrating. My experience is the communities that don't celebrate together often fall apart really quickly. And the act of celebrating together is in itself empowering. It builds a lot of connectivity, it builds bonding capital, bridging capital, a lot of those kind of things. So one of the most empowering tools that I've discovered over the years around this kind of idea of auditing is genuine progress indicators. So right now our standard way of measuring the health and wealth of mainly countries, but is a GDP, gross domestic product. It doesn't really, from my point of view, it doesn't measure anything that's important to me, not really. Genuine progress indicators are this opportunity really for, organizations or communities to ask questions like, what's important to me? What really matters to us? And how do we want to measure that? And so there's an opportunity for a community to come up with its own criteria. And what's great about it is that you can benchmark yourself against it. So you can come up and say, so by 2015, here's where we want to be. This is an indicator for us. And then you come to that, whatever that timeline is, and you say, well, how have we done against that? If it hasn't worked, why hasn't it worked? And it becomes a way for a community to start genuinely assessing its own wealth and its growth and development. And it also provides another opportunity, again, that concept of auditing. When you have targets out in front of you, you have to then start thinking strategically about how am I going to achieve those. So it gives an opportunity for a community to then start looking internally and going, well, what are the resources we have inside that we can use? So again, this idea of capital, normally I think how it's used out in the world is financial capital. That's often how I hear it talked about. We talk about capital from a money perspective. What I'm talking about here is capital in terms of any resource that we can use that we can use or leverage from. And so our entire economy and all financial capital is based on natural capital. Does that make sense? We take a tree, we harvest it, we turn it into whatever product, we sell it. Then that creates, again, financial capital. But really the basis of all life on planet Earth is natural capital. And certainly the wealth of any community is based on its natural capital. So what are those things that are growing in its system? Whether that's a wetland, whether that's a river system, whether that's a forest block, a wildlife corridor, or a community orchard. It all comes down to natural capital. And then there's all these other related capitals that, again, we don't often talk about. But things like built capital, which is, again, our roading, a lot of our infrastructure, our sewage systems, all of those kind of parts are part of what's called built capital. And typically, again, that comes from, well, not typically, it comes from our natural capital, but typically it is funded through our financial capital. So again, these are all related, but it's good to pull them apart and actually develop our understanding of what capital is. And one of the things I'm going to be talking about most specifically is social capital, because I think it's the most important, particularly as it relates to community empowerment. But also human capital. So human capital is more about the inherent skills of individuals. So, you know, what are all those years of teaching experience that I have, and how can I bring that to the table if we're talking about, you know, kind of growing a community? Or what are those gardening skills that I have that I can offer? Someone else might have a degree in whatever else that's going to be useful and meaningful for us. So again, it's about thinking about not just capital from a financial point of view, but when we're thinking about the wealth of a community, we want to be thinking, doing a full audit of what's here, what can we work with? So one of the things that I'm really passionate about is this idea of exploring difference. So for a community to really move through, in my experience, particularly living in suburbia, I have casual relationships with people. I know a lot of my neighbors to say hello to. But there's not necessarily a strong sense of bonding capital. I don't know them well enough to have a particularly meaningful relationship with. If a community is looking at really empowering itself to solve a lot of its own issues, one of the things it's going to need to go through at some point in time is through exploring the similarities and the differences within that community. And so I think this idea of exploring difference is really important to find out what are our shared values, but also what are our different values. And it's where that shared, those things we share together, we can leverage off those and work together on those. And where there's difference, we need to know what those are, because we don't have to agree on that. We just need to know that we think differently on that perspective. It's often when communities assume a lot of shared values, shared practices, shared beliefs, and they're not actually in common, that communities, they're not able to really push through that and actually start developing their own solutions together. And again, there's a number of ways in which communities can do that. And again, as I said before, I'm going to give some examples. I'm not sure if people are familiar with NVC, or nonviolent communication, also sometimes known as compassionate communication, developed by a man named Marshall Rosenberg. And it's a fantastic model for partners, for partnerships, for for family units to use, households, parents and children working together, or in any organization, let alone in communities. A really simple format, but it's a clean, clear way for people to communicate what their wants and needs are. I'm a strong advocate of NVC. I've found people who are skilled at using it are really powerful communicators. And yeah, there's I don't know how to say it, there's an integrity about the system. It's a really powerful way for me to say what I need to say in such a way where I'm not dumping, I'm not projecting, and the other person, there's a clean space for the other person to hear. So again, communication is not about me talking at you, right? There's a talker and a listener. And so NVC acknowledges both the role of the listener and the speaker in the conversation, and that it's reciprocal. So again, I'm just flagging some of these ideas, hoping that there might be something you're interested in, you go find out more about. Decision making. How do communities work together to agree? And one of the most powerful models I've seen is hand signaling. And it's come out of the activist movement. I know it through Climate Camp, and that's been my direct experience of it. But a lot of the activist direct action stuff, I think, coming out of the UK, again, is my exposure to it. And I've been told it has an earlier history in Spain that I don't know about. More recently, it's been picked up by the Occupy movement and really taken to kind of the next level. What's great about it is it's a method that allows everyone to participate. And it allows everyone to have their say in such a way that allows things to move forward. It doesn't give the squeaky wheel all the oil, and that's often what I find in groups is, some people like talking more than others, and often those people who are the talkers dominate the space. It also uses consensus, so everyone needs to agree, but it builds in some of those core consensus principles that I think are important. I think one of the challenges in the Western world is I have this sense of I'm important and my voice matters, and therefore if no one's listening to me, I'm going to block someone else's idea, or I'm going to block something moving forward because I haven't been listened to. This allows people to be listened to and make a choice that's distinct from that of whether you feel strong enough to block it, or whether you're just going to communicate, I'm not in support of this, and I can see that it's important to everyone else, so I'm just going to let it happen. I want to communicate that, hey, I don't fully agree with this, but I don't feel strongly enough, or this isn't a strong enough thing that I'm actually not going to do it. There's some stuff you can find online about how this decision-making process works. There's a lot of videos that have been created through the Occupy movement. Again, really powerful stuff. I've seen it work in groups of 120 people who had nothing in common really, other than a sense of our climate is in need of action. That was their common point. But again, their values, how far they were willing to go, their financial situation, social, economic, ethnic, racial kind of things were all diverse. And not everyone there, most of us didn't have any experience of this, but it really worked. It takes a bit of upskilling, but it's a model that any community can pick up and run with that allows a community to have the conversations they need to have and move through decision making in a really smooth way that empowers everyone. It's great. There's other models out there that I know of, like the colored card schemes and other decision making, consensus-based decision making, but this is a really powerful one. Also, I think collaborative design, and again, I've got a permaculture background, so I've got a passion around design, but how do we make decisions together, and not just should we do it, shouldn't we do it, but how do we make decisions, strategic decisions about where we want to move together? And then we go, okay, this is our vision, now how are we going to make that come to fruition? Permaculture is a method for doing that, and again, using effective communication skills, there's an opportunity for groups of people to start making creative decisions together that help them navigate where it is they want to go. Does that make sense? So in this example here, we've got a group of people who are actually discussing a land-based design. They're actually looking at things like community development and where do you place buildings, and how do you respond to things like a sensitive stream system, and also account for where do you want to put food growing systems and those kind of things. Again, zooming out, this is also from Auckland Permaculture Workshop, but now starting to look at large-scale things. How do we start looking at bioregions? How do we start looking at the interconnectedness between, say, our rural hinterlands and our urban cores? And again, from that capital lens, what are the benefits and values and inherent characteristics of those rural hinterlands that can be put to a greater use for the whole that doesn't degrade that actual resource? And how do we use and harness all that resource that's in an urban environment, including people's skills and passion and creativity and all of that? And what are those connections? Often we talk about, Auckland City and then its rural hinterland. But I have this belief that actually the urban fabric carries on basically until where the internet cable stops, or the road stops, or our sewage system stops, or our mains water. And if we're part of that system, then we're part of an urban fabric. And the more we can start thinking strategically about how we start designing our settlements to respond to lower density and higher density and things that are around us, the more vibrant our cities are going to be, the more vibrant our rural environments are going to be. So we start looking at some of that kind of stuff and start making those connections for people, and then again they work together to collaboratively start making or exploring some opportunities. What's a better way of placing our residential buildings than spreading them out one by one, side by side, kind of across our entire landscape? Sprawl. Are there more creative ways in which we can actually live together? So we start exploring a lot of those kind of ideas. But also, in transition culture or transition towns, there's this idea of the great reskilling. We're at an interesting stage in human history where we've lost a lot of our skills, particularly our land-based skills. And from that natural capital lens, we actually need to start redeveloping those, because that's actually what's sustainable. Things like biomass. It's a renewable resource. Plants keep growing. And if we're in control of our food source, and if we have food security, then we're that much further along to empowerment. So one of the things we're really big on is the reskilling. And so one of, and again, this isn't unique to Auckland Permaculture Workshop, but how do we learn those old skills around gardening? I have an anthropology background, and I don't know of any land-based culture that doesn't grow food together. The idea of my plot is here and your plot is there, and we don't really talk to each other and help each other out, it is kind of a new phenomenon, really. So again, how do we work together to meet our needs? And from a suburban scale, even you can think of, I've got my backyard plot, you've got yours. I grow my tomatoes, you grow your tomatoes. We have a glut of tomatoes for a month, and we're missing out on most of our other food needs. What if I grew tomatoes, shared them with you, you grew something else that I can't grow because I'm growing tomatoes? And how does that look when we start multiplying that out? How can we start thinking creatively about integrated food production, particularly in a suburban scale? So again, we explore some of those ideas. Local food movement's a big part of community empowerment as well. And so it's not just about, am I growing my own food, which is great, but not everyone's a gardener. And not only that, that's maybe not the most effective use of my time or energy. I might have another skill set, and there's someone else there who's a fantastic gardener. How do I support them to make a living and provide a community service? And so local food movement for me is huge, and it's happening all around the world. The idea of the 100-mile diet, which has come out of the kind of the Northwest Pacific, Vancouver kind of region. I've seen it coming up in all different areas. Here in Auckland, we have things like Ubi, which are really taking off out of our own backyards. The more we can support local food production, the more resilient we are, and I think the more empowered we are to, again, start navigating our own future. Auckland used to be a breadbasket. There used to be incredible amounts of food being grown here, and there still are, but we export our foods, and particularly our best foods typically today. So how do we start making those connections between local producers and local consumers? The local food movement's a part of that, and things like community-supported agriculture, CSA schemes are great. Things like Ubi are a fantastic way of doing that. But also, what enterprises, what restaurants, cafes are there around town that are actually buying direct from producers local produce? Are we eating seasonally? These kind of things are all become really important. Also, this idea of local currency. From an empowerment point of view, the more we have control of our local economy, the more resilience, the more vibrancy, and the more sovereignty, I guess, a region has or a community. And so community currencies or complementary currencies occur. There's lots of different ones out there. There's things like time banking. There's things like LET systems, local exchange and trade systems or schemes. One of the things that's great about those two systems is they're inherently local in that you're actually, and they help develop relationships between individuals. So they're all about harvesting human capital. What are the skills that you have that you're willing to share that I can use? And what are those skills that I've got that I'm willing to share? And instead of me giving you money and then you giving me money, or me giving you money and you giving her money, we trade in something other than national currency. And we can save our New Zealand dollars for all those things we can't meet, all those needs we can't meet at a local level. The other thing that it means is wealth doesn't leak out of the community in the same way. You can imagine using national currency. So I receive, and this happens in almost all communities. They've done a lot of research around it. 80% of wealth leaks out of communities. So you imagine I get my paycheck, you get your paycheck. I go to the supermarket, you go to the supermarket. I go any number of places. If they're not locally owned, that money, a lot of that wealth is automatically going to go straight out of the community. The more transactions I can have locally, the more that wealth stays and remains within the community. Does that make sense? When you're using a local currency, you can't spend that money anywhere else. And so the reason it's called complementary currency is because it's about complementing a national system that has lots of benefits, but complementing it in a way where we're actually bypassing or trying to reduce a lot of those negative aspects of national currencies. It's a great way of building community capital in any different ways, and again, of harnessing the community's wealth and then reinvesting that back into the local community. I mentioned before this idea of transition culture. You might be more familiar with it as transition towns. Rob Hopkins, the founder, he calls it transition culture, and I think that's a more appropriate name because it's not about the settlement pattern I live in. I don't live in a town, and it's also about a cultural shift. This idea of transition culture, it's come out of the UK, out of, I guess the first transition town was in Totnes. But one of the great things for me about this is it's come out of a permaculture framework, and it's looking at how do we empower a community to start navigating its own future, knowing that we've got some really big issues on the horizon. And it's come up with these touchstones, or what I like to call touchstones, and there's 12 of them. And it's almost become this really useful framework for how a community starts thinking about how do we build in resilience and how do we empower ourselves, again, to sail our own waka where we want it to go. So we have things like, setting up a steering group that starts organizing and starts formalizing some of the structures around it, but also raising awareness in the local community about what transition is and why it's important. Connecting with already existing groups, that's again back to the auditing process, so we're starting to look again at what's happening elsewhere. What are the other organizations that are doing parts of what we're doing? Let's not double up, let's work with them, let's bring them on board, and let's see how we can support them. Also this idea of organize a launch of an event, and often this is called the Great Unleashing, but you get to a certain momentum and then you have this big festive, creative community celebration. And I'll share about one of those that I've been involved with in a minute. Also, another great thing about it is you identify within the community what's important to them, and then you let them run with it, and you just provide the framework for it. So you're passionate about growing food, you're passionate about energy, you might be passionate about local economics. Great, if there's enough other people who have similar interests, you form a group that it's all about local food security or gardening or whatever that's important to you. You might form something around a local energy network and looking at it, exploring options and how to take pressure off the grid, as well as creating alternatives or lower energy costs for your community. And you'd look at something completely differently. And you check in with each other and you share what you're doing, but you just basically carry on. So it allows people to go with where their passion is. I won't go through all of them, but I do want to flag it. There's a lot of information you can find out about transition culture out there, and it's a fantastic model. City Repair, one of my favorite projects. This is in Portland, Oregon. And they've realized there's a whole bunch of inherent dysfunctions in our urban fabric, the way we design and set up our settlements. How do we start recreating community in places like suburbia? So one of their strategies is, and these are all the nodes around the Portland region. So this is in Portland, Oregon in the United States. One of their main things is using intersections, suburban intersections. And you get the people who live on the corners of intersections to agree that they'll form a node in that intersection. And then you call the community and you paint that the intersection. And it's a way of the community of claiming back that area as a community space, not as a vehicle access network. And all of a sudden, all these things start to change and start to happen, which is quite cool. Another thing that happens on these intersections is some kind of community amenity. So they decide what it's going to be. It could be a community notice board. In some of them, or in one of them, it's a solar powered urn where you can get cups of tea all 24 hours a day. And they've got a little kiosk there, and you kind of take your cup out, and they put a bench there so people can just sit down and start having conversations that you don't have if there's no place in your suburban area to sit down and talk to. Some of them are public artworks. There's a whole range of things that they do, really vibrant. And again, these nodes, these circles on the intersections then become places for the community to come meet, have celebrations together, they'll do block parties, all of that kind of stuff. City Repair is a fantastic one. So here's some examples of some of the stuff that City Repair have gone up to. So there's the community notice board I mentioned. Again, they'll often have bike rallies and those kind of things. Here's the 24-hour-a-day solar urn I mentioned. And again, they just thought, well, why not create a lounge in the street? This is our street after all. And I'm sure there's lots of legal issues associated with that. But again, that's for the community to negotiate with, here it would be Auckland Transport. And I know a lot of the values that are underpinning a lot of what they're doing would resonate with Auckland Transport. So again, it's about how do we think outside the box and use our existing infrastructure to start really empowering ourselves to start having the conversations that matter to us. This is an organization this was an event that I was one of the key organizers for, called the Treasure Hunt, and it was organized by Transition Point Chevalier. We did this in 2008. And one of the great things about this for me was we are having community conversations, and there were about 20 of us, and we meet regularly, and it was the same 20 of us, and we seemed to be having the same conversations. And I kind of thought, where's the other hundreds of people that live in this community that aren't here, and why aren't they here? And so I kind of thought, well, we actually need to start doing something different. And how about we just have an event that's fun and allows people to start having conversations that matter to them, and they get whatever they get out of it. But at the end of the day, communities that can play together can also share together in a whole number of ways. If they're not meeting up together, they're not having the conversations that matter. So that was the inspiration. So what we did is we mapped out our suburb, and we went, okay, what are all those places that have some kind of significance, whether it's ecological, whether it's cultural, whether it's social, community, whatever that was. And we started approaching local organizations. And all of a sudden, we started to connect ourselves to other groups that were out there, which was fantastic. So then we came up with our day, we started promoting the event, and we came up with this map. And from memory, we had 24, I think, different stations along the map. And people could go to as many or as few of them as they wanted. And some of the stations were people, they had someone there doing something, and some of them there was just an activity to do. And sometimes it was like, finding out about, say, Miola Reef, which runs just off Point Chev there, finding out who the Patsapaidahi were and what their role in the creation of that was one of the activities, so that people start understanding some of those traditions. I ran an event down on Point Chev Beach about I've got a mind blank now. The Day of 100 Spears, Rangi Matarao, which was this battle that happened in 1796 that was a very significant event, and it shifted the power from, at least as I understand it, Ngati Paua, who were the dominant Mana Whenua group in Auckland at the time, particularly kind of south, in the south part of the region, and Ngati Whatua won that battle, and it really shifted power. So it was kind of, how do we teach local community about some of that kind of stuff, but then also how do we have fun together? So one of the things we did was this wishing tree, and basically how it worked was you showed up, you got a piece of cardboard with a string on it, and we asked the question, how do we make Point Chev even better than it already is? And people put whatever they wanted for the community and wrote it up, and this had two aspects that I think were particularly good. One of them was the community started to inquire into that conversation. Well, actually, what do I want for this community? Which was great in and of itself, because you plant a seed internally in someone, and then what they do with it is irrelevant. But it also gave us really good feedback about what are the priorities of the community we live in. If we say we're a community-based organization, we need to know, what the values and what the ideas. And people got quite involved. And again, that's just an example. More events like this was what they put up on that. And again, at the end, we celebrated. So we had. We started at the library and we finished at the park, so we wanted to use community resources. And it was amazing how many people donated their time and energy. We had sausages, we ran out of sausages at one point, and the local marae, Te Mahurihuri Marae, went out and got a whole bunch more sausages, so they stocked up our stock, as it were. We had about 350 people at this event, and in a suburb, for us, that was huge. It was massive, and people were talking about it for days and days beforehand. It was great because it was a car-free event, so people came out in scooters, on bikes, they were walking, prams, all the rest of it, and it was just a fun day out in the local environment. And people said, there were people who said, "Oh, I've lived in this community for 30 years, and I didn't actually know about that." So again, part of the idea was, how do you, again, create fun activities that allow a community to play together and start identifying what's important to them and how can they share their skills together. And one of the last projects I want to share is Festival for the Planet. So this is something that Auckland Permaculture Workshop was involved in organizing, and we supported Te Puna Manua and 350 also, so the three of us kind of organized the event, and then we had a whole bunch of other sponsors who came on board, and a bunch of different people who contributed in a whole range of ways. One of the things for me that was great about this was it provided Aucklanders an opportunity to talk about what was important to them as it related to climate change. This is, it's a heavily politicized topic, but we're not really talking about it in the public discourse. And communities that don't talk about collective issues have a really hard time moving through to the next level of empowerment. So part of empowerment is actually having those difficult conversations. And they don't have to be difficult, but sometimes they are. And again, we use this idea of celebrating and fun. And we made it into this really festive event. And the brief for the graphic design was, let's have it be vibrant and have it be something that people get the sense of, oh, I want to be part of that. It's not just a bunch of people sitting around talking. And so we got a group of 4 young people to actually interview James Hansen, who is one of the world's leading experts on climate science, climate change. And they got to have an opportunity to have a really informed dialogue with him that was witnessed by about 800 people. We did it at the town hall. And then we followed that by these mini workshops, and there was song and dance and all the rest of it. And so again, it's about looking at opportunities to have communities have fun together, talk together, and start working out what's important to them collectively and individually, and then how can they together work to make that happen. So I guess our little bit in that is running what's called a permaculture design certificate. And I guess what we do that's unique in a way is that we cater the permaculture design certificate, which is an internationally recognized course for the Auckland bioregion. So it's really about what does all of this mean for us here in Auckland? What are some of our challenges that are specific and unique to the Auckland region, and how are we going to collectively work together to solve those? So that's basically what I put together today. I don't know if, hopefully it's been useful, and I'm not sure if you have any questions leading on from that, but I really just wanted to give a snapshot of what my last, 10 years in community development, the experiences I've had, and what I found that works in really helping a community to start growing its internal capability and start looking out onto the horizon and going, where do we want to sail? And then what skills, what resources do we need to get us there?
That's great.